Okie doke. Well, today we have with us Chad Roby. He's our speaker for this month. So thank you for joining us. And as I mentioned before we get started, I would like to ask everyone to please mute your mics for the presentation, for the duration of the presentation. Chad wants us to be more interactive in this session, so do please unmute yourself if you want to make a comment or if you want to ask a question. Alternatively, you can include your questions in the chat box provided. So the goal of our water speaker series, Diversity in Water, is to highlight the stories of diverse leaders in the water industry, how their identity has impacted their journey, and how they see diversity playing a role in the future of the water industry. And so, as I mentioned, we have Chad Roby with us today from Jacobs. Chad has over 20 years in the engineering industry with a focus on water and wastewater planning, design, and construction. At Jacobs, he provides leadership through mentoring and career development of project managers and engineers, which includes fostering inclusion and diversity. He also leads and manages a portfolio of projects to ensure strong project delivery, client satisfaction. Chad's Army career spans 23 years with roles and responsibilities including Platoon Leader during Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2006 and Team Leader of a technical engineering team in 2019 supporting multinational construction efforts throughout the Middle East. So with that, I want to go ahead and just briefly introduce to you the organizers of this Diversity in Water series. So I am representing the Diversity Committee with the Ohio chapter of the American Water Works Association. We are a committee that's really committed to uplifting the diverse voices within the water industry, and we welcome everyone to join our committee. So if you're interested, please do reach out to me. I'll provide my email address in the chat box. Our awesome partners in this diversity series are the Young Professionals Committee, who are also part of the Ohio section of American Water Works Association. They have awesome events throughout the year, and also they're always open to welcoming new members. I want to hold this space for a minute for anybody from the Young Professionals Committee to share with us any recent updates from the committee on events, upcoming events rather. Anybody? All right, usually Megan's around, but she is on a much deserved time off. Okie doke. Well, with that, let's get into the series. I will pass on the mic then to Chad Roby, and thank you again for being our speaker for this session. And once again, folks, if you want to ask Chad any questions during this presentation, please feel free to unmute yourself. We want to be able to make this as interactive as possible. All right, it's all yours.
Thank you, Savna. Can you confirm you can see my right screen?
Not yet.
Uh-oh. Let me do that again. All right, how about now?
All right, we see your intro slide.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. I appreciate everyone joining today. So I'm going to be talking about a number of things today. And I guess I wanted to start with, you know, when I first was approached to do this, I was a little bit hesitant. You know, I talked to Sapna, and then I'll talk to some of the diversity committee folks and some internal folks to Jacobs, and just really thought about what message I could bring. You know, maybe I'm not the poster child for diversity and inclusion, but what led me to this, though, is my veteran background. And for me, that didn't immediately make you think about diversity and inclusion. But the more I talked to people, some of our diversity and inclusion folks within Jacobs and across the industry, it became more evident to me that really it does fit within that space, within that conversation. And looking on our diversity and inclusion website, veterans is part of our diversity and inclusion program. And so it just really became apparent to me that it was an important conversation. I'm excited to talk about it today, excited to talk about with folks afterwards if there's follow-on discussions.
Otherwise, just press pound to continue.
All right. So with that, I'll jump in here. So you'll see that some of the themes that I'll talk about is really that I've lived, I've lived 2 careers, one being as a water engineer and one being as an Army, being in the Army Reserve for 23 years. I've had split careers. That first photo is with the Army Corps of Engineers. So that's my current assignment. I'm there on the left. I actually have my Lieutenant Colonel rank on. That's a fairly new promotion for me. But what you see there in the middle is Colonel Friedel, who is a woman in the Army. And to make Colonel is a huge achievement. I'm not sure if I'll make it to that next level, but you'll see throughout my presentation that it's something that the Army has embraced. We've embraced diversity and inclusion with the Army. The other thing, I feel fortunate to be part of an organization such as Jacobs, where inclusion is built right into our core values. So I pasted them there. So right there in the middle are 4 values that we emphasize across the company in terms of influence our culture, and inclusion is built right in there. So themes of my discussion today is going to surround being an ally. So an ally both to veterans, but really across the diversity and inclusion spectrum. And then also veterans and some things maybe folks haven't talked about or thought about as you've encountered veterans. So a few acknowledgements first. So, in prep for this, I went back and I viewed some of the presentations, speakers. I've attended some of these live, but I certainly haven't made all of them, but I want to listen to a few. And I was really impressed with all the great people that had such rich stories. And what you really heard, for me, what I really heard is just kind of a passion for this industry. We heard a lot of their personal struggles, career struggles, personal struggles. And I really thought it was such valuable stories. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank the committee and really just what such an impactful vision you guys have in putting this on and connecting people in this way. All right, a little bit about my journey. So this will be my agenda, just breaking it down. So a little bit about my career journey, maybe even some of my life journey. Talk about diversity and inclusion, specifically as it relates to veterans. And then a little bit of career advice. All right, so who does the diversity and inclusion include? And that was a conversation I had with myself before I agreed to do this presentation, kind of like I alluded to at the beginning. And what fits into there really started to expand what I thought about diversity and inclusion. We have within Jacobs, we have a diversity and inclusion leaders, one being Toyin. And I had a call with her, and she, really helped frame some of her personal struggles, why she got into that role. And so I really had a really rich experience just even prepping for this presentation. But she talked about her husband, he's on the autism spectrum. And, I think she'd be okay with me sharing that because she's so passionate about, having this conversation. But she really opened my eyes to that. What does diversity and inclusion include? And gosh, I don't know if the right words are on the screen, but as I thought about what that include, I started to put them down. And, there's several listed there. Veterans is one of those that belong within that category, and I'm sure others. So I also want to take a moment just to acknowledge our collective value across the water industry, across the diversity and inclusion discussion. This is a slide I found within our materials for Jacobs. We have a lot of great materials for diversity and inclusion within our resources with the company. This one really spoke to me because it talked about acknowledging our value. And for me, being a water professional, just I can talk about the value that we bring to society all day long, in terms of impacting health, human health, protecting human health, protecting the environment. And that also really being in the Army, that leads us, that's one of the first things we restore. We restore power and water because that is really the foundation of security. So we maybe take it for advantage in, here, because it's just such a thing. We turn on our tap, but just how important water is. And that little graphic in the right, that was another thing that I really liked within the material. It was specific to talking about pronouns and using the right pronouns. So that's a great discussion in and of itself. But I thought it was even a broader message in that, are they a boy or girl? Well, gosh, they're a person. And if I think we could apply that across the board. Just treat people like a person, like they have value. All right. So it's time to mention, I'd like to make this a little interactive. I want to have a little fun, use a little levity here. So I use a lot of these words on my coworkers. And in the beginning, when I first started using them, they're like, gosh, Chad, what does that even mean? And I actually have a little fun with it. So I like to throw a new word in. Once they get used to it, I'll throw a new word in there. So I got a list here, and what I'd like, if I can get some people to volunteer, if you know what these words means, I'd love for you to come off mute and tell me what it means. So the first one is pogey bait. Has anyone ever heard of that word? I'm going to insist somebody makes a guess. One brave soul, that's all I need. Nobody brave?
Is it trail mix? Snacks?
Oh, gosh, I don't know who said that, but I think they must know a little bit about the Army. So it's food you take to the field. And usually we take pogey bait, which is, snacks. We take it to avoid eating MREs. So if you don't know what an MRE, meal ready to eat. All right, the next one is pop smoke. Any guesses on that one? I'm not getting any brave souls today.
Smoke bomb.
I didn't catch what that was, so I'm just going to show it. So basically, it means to move out, distract the enemy or your boss, as it may apply in the civilian world. All right, high speed, low drag. Anyone?
These are hard. Like, I have no reference point.
To move forward quickly?
Yeah, high speed, low drag really generally refers to somebody who did an outstanding job. They're outstanding. 5x5. Maybe I better just move through these quickly, but I still think this was useful in terms of acknowledging the fact that maybe military folks and veterans may use some different lingo. 5x5, that's just a reference to that you're doing really well. Ate up like a soup sandwich, you probably can actually get from inference what that one might mean.
It was delicious. I don't think
quite.
sandwich is delicious, but
Not usually refers to somebody who did something maybe not at their best moment. All right, last one is mandatory fun. So the Army likes to, we talk about team building, and it is a little bit of a slam maybe towards the Army, where they make you go do something fun, but so Army sponsored fun. All right, so let's drive on here. So now I'm going to get a little bit into my career and talk about both the military and my water engineer career. So just, I'm an engineer. I had to lay it out. I put a little timeline, like, gosh, how do I convey all this information? And of course, linear, engineers were kind of that way. But starting from my internship as a water engineer, I took this really valuable class in high school that gave us the opportunity to research a couple of careers. We opened up the books and just found careers we might like, and then they set up with internships within the community. So one of mine was to do medical technologist. So I went to a hospital, watched them draw blood, autopsies, that kind of thing. And it was somewhat interesting, but what I really was drawn to was that my internship as an environmental engineer. And that is really what kickstarted my career. Worked for a power plant at doing environmental compliance. And then I did that on and off while I was going to school. But that's really how I started the track of pursuing a degree in environmental engineering. So you see that though, that my bachelor's degree came after boot camp. So while I was in college, I was paying for it, I was taking out loans, that kind of thing. And my baby sister joined the Army as a way to help pay for college. And I saw her, gosh, get loan repayments. She bought a new car. I was like, gosh, maybe I should go check that out. And I said, hey, set me up with your recruiter. So one thing led to another. She and I shipped off to basic training about the same time. Went to basic training, AIT, came back, finished up my degree. From there, I decided to pursue a master's degree. So I did that, went to University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I did research work in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, which is super fun. So we collected water samples amongst other things within the park, but I just did a ton of hiking. So the scenery and the exercise was just wonderful. So I graduated with that in 2005. And then shortly after that, I finished my initial commitment as an enlisted soldier. And then I decided, well, gosh, I think I want to do this Army thing a little bit longer. Even though I met my initial commitment contract, I decided to commission, and I commissioned as a second lieutenant. And then shortly after that, though, I got deployed to Iraq. So that's the first deployment. I deployed as a logistician. That was quite early into the war, so some of the conflict was still going on during that period. So from there, I returned and got my first career as a consulting engineer. So Stacia actually with the city of Columbus, gave a really good presentation, talking about consulting. So I thought that was good framework in terms of how consulting engineers kind of navigate their career. So it's really good advice she gave. After that, though, I had my first daughter, Casey, and my mom, when I told her that we were pregnant, she's like, but you're not even married. And I was like, well, Mom, that's not exactly how it works. But so from there, I got on my second deployment. So I went to Kuwait this time around. I went as a transportation officer. So that was another unique deployment. We were one of the battalions, essentially, if you remember the withdrawal out of Iraq, it was really one of the largest military withdrawals, at least in modern history, if not forever. So we were super busy pulling stuff out of Iraq, doing convoys in and out. Got back from that deployment, got married to my wife, Amy. And then about that same time, I kind of moved up into the project management ranks. You can see there, second daughter came along 2014. So just the year prior to that, we went to China, and I always joke with my wife, and I'm not sure if she thinks it's funny or not, but I'll always tell her and my younger daughter that she was made in China because we're leading up right up to that trip. Then you might see a theme here. About every 5 years, I seem to get picked up for a deployment. So I went on another deployment in 2018. That one was, again, another unique deployment. I'm fortunate in that each of my deployments have different roles, different jobs, different missions. And the next one was a deployment to Kuwait, where we did engineering across the Middle East. We did all kinds of planning, design, and construction projects across the Middle East. So we did just a ton of travel. It was kind of interesting, though. One project would be in the UAE. We get to spend time in the city there, Dubai, seeing the tallest building in the world, Burj Khalifa. And then the next assignment was in Syria, and we're in full battle rattle, doing, right in the middle of the conflict at that time. Samna, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was curious to know, what was your perspective of water as you traveled through the Middle East, and what were the perspectives of Middle Easterners around water?
Gosh, that's such a good question. And being water resources in Ohio, I would say our water resources are plentiful. There's some areas of groundwater scarcity in Ohio, but by comparison, water scarcity is profound within the Middle East. And we were stationed on a little base in the middle of nowhere. And so we either had to truck water in, or the Army, we operate these reverse osmosis treatment systems that, get on trucks. So we would go to the closest water body, filter it, bring it back to the camp. It really shaped, in terms of how we operate it, but also the local community and how they operate it. And that is part of the projects that we worked on, is restoring water treatment plants, the distribution and wastewater treatment. One of the projects I worked on in that 2018 deployment was to get a wastewater treatment plant up and running. For the most part, it wasn't functioning correctly, and the locals didn't have the skill set necessary to do it. We talk about professional operators here in the States, and gosh, they really are professionals, and I love to talk to professional operators, but they didn't have that skill set there, and so I went there to help them get it up and running. And I went to the primary treatment. That was kind of okay. Went to the secondary treatment. If you've ever done wastewater on the wastewater side, maybe folks are more on the water side on this call, but on the wastewater side, you have aeration tanks, biological treatment, and it was just black. And I was like, well, gosh, that's not great. So let's kind of dig into this. So what's going on? Walk the operator through it. And turns out he just didn't turn the aerators on. He's like, well, gosh, they're loud. They're really expensive to run. And of course, we kind of got to the bottom of it quickly. But yeah, it was a different perspective in terms of use and how they manage and water availability. That was a great question. Thank you. All right, so from there though, global pandemic, of course, for us just changed how we work across the globe. Yeah, I don't think I could show a timeline without marking that. But shortly after that though, I got a promotion within Jacobs. So I started doing more portfolio management. So it's broader project delivery. And I still do project delivery as a PM, but portfolio management gave me an opportunity to see more diversity in terms of our portfolio, our projects, working with project managers, which is super rewarding, working with clients, helping solve problems. And I really enjoyed the kind of additional aspect that's brought in terms of delivering projects. And of course, there, not too long ago, I got promoted to lieutenant colonel. And I always tell myself, gosh, I don't feel like I'm old enough to be a lieutenant colonel, even though I am. But I'm super proud to pin that on. And then maybe backtracking a little bit as it relates to maybe how you think about veterans, and somebody may set to the left or right of you at the office. My first deployment, I came back and started my consulting career, really no issues. My second deployment, I came back from deployment, and I'm looking to go back into the workforce. And gosh, my employer at the time was like, well, we want you to move. I'm like, well, I just got back from deployment. I don't really want to move. And it may have been the best business case for the company. That's not for me to say on this call, but from the human perspective of it, I'm back from deployment. Maybe it wasn't such a great, the best integration. But it's not to say anyone had any bad intentions, though, just maybe a lack of awareness. The next one, though, I came back again from deployment. I got back. Jacobs was going through a transition, and my group, as I had it, was got spun off from the company. So I had a choice. I either basically I was supposed to spin off with this other company based on the group I was in, but I went to my local leadership and I said, "Gosh, I'd really like to stay. Would you support that?" And they did. It was another case. I was just back from deployment, trying to figure out, get back integrated into it. And I'd say they really went above and beyond and help me do that. All right. So, everyone likes photos. So I thought I would show a few here, just talk about a little bit, what you said from early on, Simon, talks about what makes up, what your journey looks like. And so a few pictures here. Yeah, starting from the left there, my role model is really my grandparents. I was raised by my grandparents, so really just a generation, last generation impacted by the Great Depression. So I'd say their morals and work ethic, very, very traditional. Something my granddad always said, in terms of spending money, it's like you pay your bills, you save some money. If you got any left over, then you go do something fun. So I've carried that forward. You see there, I'm surrounded by girls. So those are my siblings, all my sisters there. And then if you look in the bottom right, just below that is my family. And of course, I had to have 2 girls, which has been just a wonderful experience, but I just continue to be surrounded by girls. And the other thing that I maybe I'll often overlook is my wife, Amy. She's mixed racial background. And, at this point, we've been married for 20 years. That's a joke. We haven't really been married for 20 years, but she says it feels like it, maybe because she has to put up with me. But gosh, even close to home, some of the personal struggles that she has, I can sometimes overlook those. So it's important to have that discussion with her and our daughters. Look, they're my college roommates. So I came from rural Kentucky, rural white Kentucky, just to be candid. So not a ton of diversity, poor, certainly, but my granddad always called us country poor, not city poor. We'll have to talk later if we want to dig into what that means. But so I went to college for the first time, moved in with Clarence here, who I've shown. He's a Black gay man. And gosh, I didn't know what to think about that when we first moved in. But what I found is that it's been a long-term lasting friendship. He's followed me wherever I went. When I went to Knoxville, he'd come visit me. Now that I live in Ohio, he'd come visit me. Just been a really lasting, rich relationship with him. Well, also within the Army, you see the two pictures, Armies and my consulting career, Jacobs, that I've got lots of opportunities to travel and be exposed to different cultures. The one there where we're eating dinner, that's in Poland. So just a diverse culture there. On the right is a couple of Iraqi soldiers. So we ran across, we worked with them very closely. So I brought them a couple of Pepsis, like, hey, take this picture with me. And we sat around and just kind of drank them and BS a little bit. So super cool experience. And then the other thing I wanted to show here is sometimes these careers intersect. So this is a case where my team, as we were prepping for deployment, we approached the city of Columbus, said, hey, we're doing some training. We want to see some of this construction. And we went out and saw, that's a clear well you can see there going in the background. So use it as a training opportunity. All right, so what is basic training like? So just a little bit of frame of reference. All these pictures are from the internet, but gosh, they really align with how I remember basic training going. The first picture, you get off the bus, the drill sergeant wants you to get there fast. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to get there fast. And I'll let the middle picture there speak for itself, but we did a ton of rucking around. We walked everywhere. That bottom picture is soldiers coming out of a gas chamber. So they make you go through a gas chamber to prove that your gas mask works. And that is one of my fondest stories. It wasn't fond at the time, but I really like to tell it. But I came out, I had a buddy. That's what we call friends within the military, battle buddies. That's another terminology I'll use on my coworkers. But he's really rubbing his eyes and snot everywhere. I'm like, no, don't do that. Here, let me help you. Water. And a drill sergeant came up to me. He's like, started yelling at me. He's like, hey, go hug a tree. So I had to hug a tree and say I will mind my own business and all this stuff. But just one of those career Army things for sure. Lots of push-ups, and then ultimately, of course, the day we feel really proud, honored is when we finally make it to that graduation ceremony, get our certificate, feel like a real soldier, and join the ranks. All right, talking about the value of veterans, and I'm talking about all veterans, is that we bring it. You talk about core values, morals, those kinds of things. It's really built into us from the beginning. We also bring a lot of direct skills. For me, I did real engineering within the Army. Medical, of course, is a big direct skill that we see a lot, transferable. But that's just two. Gosh, the list could go on and on. We also focus hugely on teamwork, leadership, critical thinking, and problem solving. And the next one there, endurance, strength, and resiliency, it's just required. You think about the deployments, the things that, challenges, the diversity of challenges we go through. Resiliency is a key component of being a soldier. And the last one, diversity and inclusion, I got those pictures from a couple Army websites, is that I feel that the Army has done a really good job in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion. The Army often lags behind mainstream culture, especially when it comes to LGBT. Gosh, we've lagged so far behind in that. I think we made great strides in catching up there. But in terms of diversity, because it didn't really matter. You just showed up. Whoever's in the foxhole with you, that's just who you had to protect your six, as we say. And so it wasn't like we thought diversity and inclusion and just part of being a soldier. You work together as a team. All right. So another thing from the Army we say, which creates a leadership framework, is be, know, do. And I bring this up because this ties into the career advice that I've seen lots of folks do on this series, which I really appreciate. And I thought this one was worth bringing to the group because it's, on the face of it, maybe it's even a little simple. Be, know, do. It's easy to say, but we've written entire books on it, to entire leadership manuals on it, because you break it down and it becomes a little more complex. But the B part is, who are you? What are your morals? What are your values? What confidence, resiliency we've talked about. The next one being the know. So lots of folks on here, lab folks, operators, engineers, administrators. It's that technical skills that we all possess. That's part of being a leader, is having those technical skills. Also within that domain is the interpersonal tact, which, one of the words we use for that nowadays is emotional intelligence. So that's a component of being a good leader within the Army and the civilian sector. And then the do part, you gotta have the do part to be a leader. You gotta extend your influence, positive influence. I'll talk about that a lot. You want to positively extend your influence change for the good, and then ultimately get the results as the last one there. So the next topic is kind of a hard topic, and it's one that we associate with veterans quite a bit. That's why I felt like it was something I needed to include in this discussion. We've all heard of PTSD. It's not exclusive to the military, as it's just a reaction to a really horrifying, terrifying event, like you see there. It can affect anyone. But the reason why we associate with military folks is because military people are, on average, exposed to these types of horrifying, terrifying situations more than the general population. So we do see that veterans suffer from PTSD at a higher percentage than the general population. A lot of that is due to direct combat, of course, but also that we see that it's due to sexual trauma and other traumas within the military that maybe we don't see in the general workforce. The last thing there, though, is don't assume that someone has PTSD, whether they're a veteran, active service member. But even if they do, of course, they deserve kindness, understanding, and respect. And part of that discussion for PTSD is just being an ally. And I said it at the beginning of the presentation, being an ally is important across the board, no matter what category we're talking about. Be an ally for everyone. But in terms of, for PTSD specifically, learn a little bit about it. What is it? What does it mean? Just to provide support. Talks about, don't pressure them and talking to them about it, but just talk to them, have conversations. You also find that folks with PTSD will appreciate routines. So just understanding that folks may need that routine, and that there may be triggers. The backfiring car, I don't know how true that one is, but certainly there are triggers, gunfire that may trigger people. The one when conversations that I've had with folks that have PTSD, it's, especially for the Iraqi Freedom War, is that, we did a ton of convoys, IEDs. And so they see stuff on the side of the road and they're like, gosh, is there an IED hidden in that? Because we spent, years just thinking about that, watching for that. But the next one, though, is to always keep yourself safe. if there's a situation that escalates, you should remove yourself and get that person help or get yourself help. And then the last one is just, if you are a veteran, peer-to-peer counseling, one-on-one talks, folks that have been there can be really effective. So this next one here is adjustment disorder. So this is a little closer to home for me. So this is very common amongst service members. I would say to some degree, anyone has been on a deployment has some kind of adjustment disorder. So for me, when I came back from deployments, I found myself a little lost. How do I get fit back into routine? My family's super happy to see me. I got a video where I met my older daughter at the school. She ran and hugged me. Such a wonderful moment. And so after that little bit of initial excitement, you're like, well, gosh, what do I do now? And finding yourself figuring out a way to get back into that some kind of routine can be a challenge. And so, I talked about me personally, I don't suffer from PTSD. I know too many battle buddies that did, but if you think about what I did for my 3 deployments and adjustment disorder and those kinds of things, it's not surprising that maybe we had some struggles reintegrating. So this right here, kind of weird looking picture, represents my first convoy. So we were in Iraq, we were sitting at the gate, and at that time, the danger level was so high that we drove without lights on. We used MEGs, harder target to hit, as it were. So I'm sitting there in this up armored Humvee. I got Specialist Hogan was the driver. Specialist Hogan was a 6'5". Well, I really want to say kind of jolly green giant because he was so friendly, barely fit in the seat. And we're sitting there waiting to go out the gate. I got my MVGs on, and I don't know if I've ever been so scared in my life since that first time. After the first one, you just kind of becomes routine, and you go out. Yes, certainly some anxiety with going out the gate anytime you go, but that first time, I'll never forget looking over at Specialist Hogan and thinking, gosh, what's going to happen? And one of the things that was going on at the time, and what we talked a lot about, was these explosively formed projectiles, which would just cut right through Humvees, kind of like butter. This is off the internet, but this is pretty much what they look like. And while I really wasn't ever affected by this, none of my convoys got hit by any of these EFPs. Some of the folks in my company and battalion weren't so lucky. A couple other things relate, though, from that deployment is that within our battalion, there was a brother-sister that was there at the same time, and he unfortunately was hit by an EFP and died. And of course, his sister's there. Super somber experience, for the whole battalion when that happened. My sister actually was there at the same time. I mentioned early on that my sister joined the military first. We also did this deployment together at the same time. And one of the things that happened to her was she was in a tent and a mortar fell, it fell right beside her tent, and it was a dud. But gosh, had it went off, it would have, of course, leveled the whole tent that she was in. I guess point being is that maybe not PTSD, but a lot of stressful situations that military veterans come back from. So adjustment disorder. So what is it? It's just a response to a stressful event. And, it's worth noting that there's lots of causes for it. Folks that go through divorce, even childbirth, you think what a joyful thing that is, but, it's a huge adjustment. Death in the family, illness, job loss, deployment, what can happen. It's what you would think. It's anxiety, depression. And for me, I made it green. So what do you do? It really just time. I guess I learned over time from coming back from a deployment just to give it more time. I was always quick to go back into the workforce, but really just given that time was the most important factor for me. All right, another topic, super important topic, is veteran suicide. So if you look at the rate there, it's 1.5 times higher. You might have heard that 22. So that's 22 veterans die from suicide a day. So you think just how horrifying even saying those numbers out loud is. We've made some good strides, though, in reducing that stigma. And, I think part of that stems from the inclusion conversation. It's acknowledging mental health problems and just being inclusion across the board. So warning signs, I'm not going to go through all those, but the first one may not be the most obvious, even though it could be, is that somebody will just say, I'm going to kill myself. But looking at what you should do, so that's a card that we keep with us within the Army. It's called the ACE card. So what do you do if you think somebody's struggling? You just ask them, how are you doing? Are you thinking about it? Of course, provide care for them, and then escort them to get help. And if they can't escort them, try to not leave that person alone and go get help yourself. Another kind of potentially polarizing discussion is recruiting within the military of disadvantaged populations. So, I really view it as a social dilemma, because for me, the military is a profession. It's honorable, tons of opportunity for pay that you may not get from the civilian sector, benefits, adventure. But often disadvantaged communities are targeted. And what I'll put there in the box there is that military recruitment focuses on getting someone out of poverty, getting them a college degree, which sounds good. And gosh, it is good. It's what I did to get a college degree. But I saw this saying, I'm paraphrasing it, but something I saw on Twitter is like, well, I must put my life on the line in order to get out of poverty and to get a degree. So that's where the kind of the conflict comes from. But for me, we can support both military recruitment and acknowledge that maybe we should be creating the opportunities for disadvantaged communities that doesn't require them to join the military. So it's not that joining the military is a bad thing, but if it's the only thing and you have to join and potentially go to Iraq and kick down doors, well, gosh, we ought to be talking about different opportunities and creating those opportunities. But you don't have to be right in this discussion. And I really like to talk about that a lot. You don't need to be right. And it's not about being right. It's about solving the problem. It's not a zero-sum game. We can be proud of the military and recruit while also creating opportunities and acknowledging that maybe targeting disadvantaged communities, it may not be the right answer. All right, so some career advice, and I know we're getting closer to the time, so I'm going to move along, but some free advice for me. So the first one is just define your values. I've talked about Jacob's value at the beginning. If you look there on the right is the Army values, and they are wonderful in terms of defining a framework for your values, but you really got to define your values and how they fit within in the larger context of your career and life. The next one we talk about in the Army quite a bit is conducting azimuth checks. So, in the choices that you make on a day-to-day, whether it's diversity, inclusion, ethics, you should always be doing an azimuth check. And that's what that soldier is doing there in the bottom right. Just making sure that his angle, he's on the right course. Same thing for your career. Are you doing the things you want? Are you doing the things within your career that are rewarding, that excite you, that you're passionate about? The next one, though, advocacy. We talk about mentorship a lot. Mentorship is wonderful. And one of the things I've talked about lately that my leadership has talked to me about is, taking that mentorship a step further and advocating for others, whether that's across the diversity and inclusion conversation or just anyone within your zone of influence is that advocate for those. It's not just your boss, it's your community, and also use that as take on that responsibility to advocate for others as well. There are a lot of folks that talk about being involved, following your passions. So I could talk about that all day. I got a couple of slides. I don't know if I'm going to make it to them, but it talks about communication, but kind of tying into communication, those assuming good intentions. And I saw this one day and I thought about it. Someone says something, maybe an email, or they said something to you that kind of rubbed you the wrong way. If you just stop and say, without really understanding what their intentions are, you should just assume they have good intentions, because they probably do. They probably do have good intentions. And maybe that word that came across a little harsh, they just didn't mean it. The last one, though, also can cause a little bit of debate, is that you should prioritize your significant others above everything else. And when I say everything else, I really do mean everything else. I mean your career, your children, your activities, your hobbies, your parents. Gosh, your significant other is your life partner. And if you think about who you should prioritize above anybody, anything else, it's your significant other. And that's really important. Something I got to remind myself as I work through my career. I mean, my career is so important. I'm passionate about it. I love what I do. And that's not to say that my career can't be a priority. Our children are priorities. Gosh, they're such priorities. But don't forget to prioritize your significant other, even ahead of your career. All right. So this one, instead of going over those items there, I'm just going to give what I thought was a good example of communicating, listening, and inclusiveness. So I was at an event yesterday, and Sid from Black and Beach, I don't know him that well, and that's why I really like this even better. Though I was standing in a group of 4 people, they were talking about things that I didn't really know what they're talking about. I wasn't involved in what they were doing, so I really had a hard time kind of interjecting myself into the discussion. So I just kind of stood there. But Sid, he paused, and if you guys know him from, I don't know him that well, but he's a super nice guy. But he paused, he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Gosh, sorry, Chad, I know we're talking about things that you can't really weigh in on," and kind of use that as an opportunity to bring me into the conversation. And I thought that was such a good lesson in terms of bringing others into the conversation. That whole extrovert versus introvert. If there's an introvert, quiet person, that's a good example of bringing somebody into the conversation. All right. So in our careers, one thing for me is just embracing the company culture. So I touched a little bit about Jacobs culture. But as I dug into this topic a little bit more, I went into our Jacobs employee network, and I found just how in depth and meaningful and rich that our Jacobs employee network really was. So these are the groups that we have, and VetNet is one of them. It's not one that I've spent a lot of time being involved, but as I start to dig through the resources and see all they have going on, it really started to appeal to me. And then on a daily basis, though, is just take the time to do some education. That could be talking to people, taking a class. The next one is don't make assumptions. Don't put somebody in a box. Like it says on the next list down. Listen with intention. So that I kind of glossed over the previous one, but there's lots of ways to listen with intent. And the last one's kind of a hard conversation to have. Recognizing your privilege can be super polarizing. It goes back to that I gotta be right conversation, and we both can be right. You can have privilege, but you also can have your own hardships. You can have privilege, and you could still have worked really hard. You could have privilege, and you could really still have earned where you got. But it's really recognizing that privilege. All right. So what if I get it wrong? This one really spoke to me, because I was like, gosh, what if I get on this webinar and I say the wrong thing and I don't use the right words? And that's okay. I think making mistakes is okay if somebody does take the time, and I encourage you, right? Because we all want to learn. Somebody takes the time to correct you, just appreciate them taking the time to make that azimuth check for you, as we call it. At the end of the day, diversity and inclusion is just really about that human connection, connecting with people, common ground, because there's always going to be common ground with folks. And lastly, I just wanted to take a moment and just recognize what I really think is a charity, worthy charity, the Wounded Warrior Project. So they have all kinds of things, programs and services, but focus on supporting folks that may have been wounded mentally, physically. So they collect funds and programs, but if you have the time, just take a couple of minutes, go to the website, find ways to be involved within this really great charity. You can contribute, if you're able. But with that, I got my name and my email address there. I would love, beyond even if there's any questions, to continue this conversation with anyone who has additional questions beyond the webinar. So Sabna, I guess I'll open it up to you to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful story, and so many great gems there. I stole some screenshots, so thank you for all the great advice that you've provided us. I want to take a moment and see if anybody here in our group has any questions or comments. All right. Go ahead.
I'll just jump in and thank Chad. I think that a lot, I know from my personal experience, it is scary to have these conversations, but as some of the diversity and inclusion trainings that I've been in, one of the first things that we do is make pledges to each other to be open and to listen, because it's some of this, when you talk to certain people, it can be, you never know how someone's going to take what you have to say. And so I totally appreciate where you're coming from with that. But I noticed through your presentation that I believe you showed from your childhood a lot of growth in that aspect.
I really liked that you touched on so many topics that, quite honestly, I wasn't expecting you to, such as, the military recruiting from disadvantaged communities, the suicide rate. I learned about that just very recently, and I was really shocked to learn about that statistic, that unfortunate statistic. And yeah, I thank you for bringing light to it and for sharing it. I'm sure it wasn't easy for you. One of the things that you mentioned that made me curious is, you adjusting and integrating back into the civilian life. What were you said that time did help you, but were there, in addition to time, were there other aspects of your life or your support system that helped you, with that adjustment over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. The VA can get a bad rap, and there are some missteps that they've made, but the local VA here has a great network of peer counseling. I mentioned, it's not just for PTSD. They also have just regular counseling that I took advantage of. And, that's where I got the word, adjustment disorder. I didn't know what it was. She's like, hey, this is a thing. So that was super helpful. The other thing I would just say is my wife. So she's also, and I forgot to mention it, and I should have, but she's also a military veteran. And so having, I mentioned peers, she is a peer. She's in the military. She's been back from deployments, and having someone who understands that, and, in terms of patience with me, I would say she showed me lots, gave me that time. We talked about it. She acknowledged that they established a routine without me. And now she went out of her way to help me to reestablish that routine and fit me into it.
That's very sweet of her. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier on about the importance of prioritizing your significant other. I really like that, because we can take our significant others for granted because, they're always there for you, but we need to appreciate them and show that appreciation. Does anybody have any questions for Chad? I have another question. Here in the water industry, there's so many characteristics of, I think, military culture that would do well for the water industry, especially in terms of like discipline and camaraderie, especially around the operations crew. So, one question is, how can we make the water industry more attractive for veterans and just like integrate more intentional practices to recruit veterans? And then we want to be able to retain the veterans. So how can we be better colleagues and supervisors to veterans who are, just coming back from deployment and are adjusting or integrating back into civilian life? So those are two big questions. Attracting and retaining.
Yeah, so the attracting part, I would say the biggest challenge probably is just acknowledging that veterans have those skills, that they have value. You talk about recruiters, and you just Google that topic, you can find that's the number one kind of hurdle, is just first recognizing that maybe those skills are out there within the veteran community. Just recognizing the skills, I would say, would be the first one. And once you've recognized it, and just like you find any good person, you target that community. Within Jacob specifically, we have folks that's what their job is. They're recruiters. They recruit military personnel because the company recognizes that those skills extend into a corporation like ours. So it's that kind of cultural change, I guess, is what I'm driving at. In terms of the integration piece, though, so me, I've always been an Army reservist, which means, I do the once a month, weekend once a month, 2 weeks a year, kind of an on and off thing. So there's two aspects of it. It's the integrating somebody on and off that kind of schedule, and then also back from a deployment. So being flexible with the schedule for like an Army reservist like myself, I need that weekend off. Doesn't affect me so much, but definitely on the operations side, when you have a plant that operates 24/7, that can be a challenge. So just willingness to work around that kind of schedule. And then the other piece is just it's kind of what I've talked about, Sabna. It's that integration piece. It's given time. You can't necessarily decide when that person comes back, but once they do come back, acknowledge that there is an integration period that gosh, maybe PTSD, but if not, that adjustment disorder, that it will take some time. And if they're not on the A game right for the first couple of weeks, just give them some integration time.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think sometimes within traditional workspaces, we want people to just jump in and start getting those outputs, right? But I think that's what makes a supervisor or a team colleague effective, is their empathy, to be able to help their colleagues out in the adjustment period. Any questions? Burning questions? Well, if there aren't any, Chad, again, big thank you for bringing your story to our community. And I'm really glad that you were able to be vulnerable with us and share with us your experiences. So we're extremely grateful to that. Your recording will be available on our YouTube page in the next couple of days or sooner. And our next speaker series is taking place on July 13th at 5:30, our usual time. Our speaker is TBD, but if you're part of our mailing list, you should get that announcement in the next few weeks here. So Chad, thank you again. do you have any last words you want to share with us?
No, thank you so much to the committee. Again, such a powerful, valuable way to bring our community together.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us and for keeping this series relevant and valuable to our community. And we'll see you in the next couple of months, and have a lovely evening. Take care. Bye.